On the 7th of December, 2017, in the heart of Budapest's Vörösmarty Square, a woman sat on a cold iron bench, seemingly absorbed in the festive chaos of the annual Christmas market. Her name, according to the meticulously crafted Canadian passport in her worn leather satchel, was Anna Varga, an art historian specializing in 19th-century Central European manuscripts. To the casual observer, she was an academic on a research trip, sketching the neo-Gothic facade of the Gerbode Café in a moleskine notebook, her fingers slightly reddened by the biting Hungarian wind. The pencil she held, however, was not a simple graphite instrument. Its wooden barrel was a precisely milled housing for a directional microphone and a microtransmitter, its signal calibrated to a narrow, encrypted frequency. The sketch itself was not an artistic rendering but a coded operational map of the square, noting the positions of plainclothes surveillance teams, potential exfiltration routes through the dense crowds, and the blind spots of the municipal security cameras. The woman, whose real name had been erased from every official record and existed only in the most secure Mossad personnel file under the designation Filera, was not observing architecture. She was preparing a kill box and baiting a trap for a ghost who had haunted European intelligence services for nearly a decade. The strategic problem facing the Mossad Caesarea division, the department responsible for special operations, was a man known only by his cryptonym, the Engineer. His real name was Tariq al-Hamri, a former professor of economics from the American University of Beirut, and he represented a paradigm shift in the nature of their adversary. Al-Hamri was not a frontline commander or a bomb maker, he was a logistical and financial virtuoso, the invisible architect behind Hezbollah's most devastating international operations. He moved money through labyrinthine networks of shell corporations, cryptocurrencies, and informal hawala systems with an artistry that left financial intelligence analysts bewildered. He procured sensitive technology, from advanced encryption software to drone components, using third-party cutouts and falsified end-user certificates that were virtually untraceable. Most critically, he moved human assets across borders with ghost-like efficiency, creating sterile travel corridors and deep-cover identities that allowed operatives to embed themselves in target countries months or even years before activation. The intelligence community possessed only a handful of grainy photographs of him, all more than 15 years old, and a psychological profile that described him as meticulous, intellectually arrogant, paranoid, and utterly devoid of a digital footprint. Previous attempts to neutralize al-Hamri had failed spectacularly, each failure reinforcing his legendary status within his own organization and deepening the frustration within the Mossad. Signals intelligence, the bedrock of modern espionage, was useless against a man who eschewed all forms of electronic communication, reputedly never carrying a mobile phone and conducting his business through face-to-face meetings and dead drops managed by a small, fanatically loyal cadre of couriers. A 2014 attempt to penetrate his inner circle using a Lebanese asset had ended with the asset's decapitated body being left in a public square in Beirut, a clear and brutal message. In 2016, a sophisticated cyber operation targeting the banking network he was believed to use resulted in the Mossad team chasing phantom transactions for 3 months before realizing al-Hamri had fed them disinformation, using their own intrusion to map their cyber capabilities. The stakes had been escalating dramatically. Intercepted chatter, too fragmented to be actionable but too consistent to be ignored, indicated that al-Hamri was in the final planning stages of a multi-pronged attack on European soil, codenamed the Cascade. The objective was not symbolic terror, but the crippling of critical infrastructure, power grids, transportation hubs, and communication networks, designed to sow mass chaos and economic disruption. The window to find and stop him was closing, and the consensus at Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv was that conventional methods were not only failing, but were actively counterproductive, serving only to harden his already formidable operational security. The key that unlocked the puzzle of Tariq al-Hamri was not found in a satellite intercept or a financial transaction, but in the dusty, 15-year-old debriefing file of a low-level Hezbollah defector. Buried deep within hundreds of pages of mundane testimony was a small, almost trivial anecdote. The defector recounted that al-Hamri, long before his rise in the organization, was a passionate, almost obsessive collector of rare books and manuscripts, with a particular fixation on the composers of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He spoke not like a terrorist, but like a scholar, of the genius of Liszt and Bartók. This detail, initially dismissed as irrelevant color, became the foundation of an audacious and psychologically complex plan. The proposal, designated Operation Winter Requiem, was a radical departure from standard procedure. Instead of hunting Alhamry in his world of shadows and violence, they would draw him into a world he loved, a world of culture, history, and art. They would not try to penetrate his network, they would create a prize so unique, so irresistible to his specific psychological profile, that he would be compelled to break his own rigid protocols to acquire it. The plan was to forge a lost masterpiece, a previously unknown piano sonata by Franz Liszt, and use it as bait to lure the world's most elusive terrorist financier into the open. The obstacles to the success of Operation Winter Requiem were formidable, each one a potential point of catastrophic failure. The technical challenge of creating the forgery was immense. It had to be perfect enough to deceive not just a passionate amateur but potentially an expert he might consult. This required more than just skilled calligraphy, it demanded historical, chemical, and material perfection. The paper had to be authentic 19th-century Hungarian linen rag paper, the ink chemically identical to the iron gall ink used by Liszt's own copyists, and the musical notation itself had to be composed in a style so convincingly Lisztian that it would pass musicological scrutiny. The second major obstacle was the creation and deployment of an operative capable of playing the role of a rare manuscripts dealer with flawless credibility. This operative would need to possess not only the standard tradecraft skills of a Mossad Katza but also a deep, genuine-seeming expertise in antiquarian books, musicology, and Hungarian history. They would need to navigate the nuances of a highly specialized, insular world of academics and collectors, a world where a single misplaced word or historical inaccuracy could unravel their entire cover. Finally, the risk of exposure was astronomical. If Alhamry sensed a trap, he would not simply walk away, his standard procedure was to eliminate the threat ruthlessly. The operative would be alone, with no possibility of a quick extraction, and the consequences of failure would be twofold, the certain death of the operative and the permanent loss of any chance to catch Alhamry, who would vanish so completely he might as well have ceased to exist. The operative selected for this mission was Ilara. Her profile was unique, a confluence of personal history and professional capability that made her the only logical choice. Born in Haifa to parents who were professional musicians, she had been a cello prodigy, destined for a career on the concert stage. That life had ended at age 17 when her parents were killed in a bus bombing in Jerusalem, an attack that was later attributed to a cell logistically supported by Tariq Alhamry's burgeoning network. The grief from this event did not break her, it transmuted into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. She abandoned the cello and entered military service, where her intelligence, linguistic skills, and profound psychological resilience quickly drew the attention of Mossad recruiters. Her motivation was not abstract patriotism but a deeply personal, precisely focused desire for retribution, a quality her handlers understood could be both a powerful engine and a dangerous liability. For Operation Winter Requiem, her entire being had to be deconstructed and rebuilt. For 18 months, she was immersed in a grueling training regimen that went far beyond typical espionage tradecraft. She spent 12 hours a day with musicologists, historians, and a world-renowned forger, learning to analyze watermarks, identify period-specific bookbinding techniques, and debate the finer points of Liszt's late-period harmonic language. She learned to speak Hungarian and German not just fluently, but with the specific academic inflections of a specialist. The psychological conditioning was the most intense part of her preparation. She underwent exercises designed to compartmentalize her grief and rage, transforming the raw emotion of her past into a tool of clinical detachment. She had to learn to inhabit the persona of Anna Varga so completely that it would withstand not only superficial scrutiny but also the intense, paranoid gaze of a man like Alhamry. The construction of the cover identity, the legend of Anna Varga, was an operation in itself, a masterpiece of bureaucratic and digital fabrication. The Mossad's Tevel department, responsible for creating and maintaining such legends, built Anna's life from the ground up, layering it with verifiable details. They established a birth record in Toronto for a child of Hungarian refugees who had fled after the 1956 uprising. They created a complete educational history, culminating in a doctorate in musicology from McGill University, complete with a forged thesis on thematic transformation in Liszt's symphonic poems, which was physically planted in the university's archives. They backdated a digital footprint, creating a sparse but consistent online presence that included a profile on Academia with several published articles in obscure, peer-reviewed journals, and a history of correspondence with real, unwitting academics in her field. To solidify her professional cover, the Mossad, through a front company, purchased a small, financially struggling antiquarian bookstore in Montreal, establishing Anna Varga as its overseas acquisitions consultant. This provided a legitimate reason for her travel and a plausible source of income. Her physical props were chosen with equal care: a slightly battered leather satchel from a specific artisan in Florence, eyeglasses with a prescription that subtly altered her vision to force a scholar's squint, and a collection of well-worn books on Hungarian history, complete with her own forged marginalia. Every element was designed to project an aura of authentic, slightly eccentric academic devotion, a life lived among dusty archives and forgotten scores. The centerpiece of the entire operation, the bait itself, was the forged manuscript. A team of specialists, operating out of a secure lab disguised as a conservation studio in Tel Aviv, worked for over a year to create it. They sourced the paper from an 1840s ledger book discovered in the archives of a defunct monastery in rural Hungary, its chemical composition and watermarks a perfect match for paper used by Liszt's publisher. The ink was recreated from a 19th-century formula, using oak galls, ferrous sulfate, and gum arabic, and was then chemically aged to simulate 170 years of oxidation. The most difficult part was the music itself. A brilliant musicologist, a former composer in his own right who now worked for Israeli intelligence, was tasked with composing a 3-page piano fragment in the exact style of Franz Liszt's late period, a work that was harmonically adventurous, technically demanding, and thematically consistent with his known compositions from the 1870s. This composition was then given to a master forger, a former art restorer who had been persuaded to lend his talents to the state. He spent 6 months practicing Liszt's unique, flamboyant musical calligraphy until he could reproduce it flawlessly. The final touch was the binding. The pages were sewn into a simple cardboard folio using thread that contained a dormant, microscopic RFID tracer, a piece of technology far in advance of anything commercially available. The finished product was more than a forgery, it was a work of art, a phantom masterpiece created for an audience of one. Ilara's insertion into Budapest, under the guise of Anna Varga, took place 3 months before the planned operational window. This period was critical for establishing her bona fides and creating a pattern of life that appeared natural and unrehearsed. She rented a modest apartment in the Terezvaros district, a neighborhood known for its artistic and intellectual history. Her daily routine was a carefully choreographed performance of academic life. She spent her mornings at the National Sekeniai Library, her afternoons browsing the city's many small antique shops and bookstores, and her evenings attending concerts at the Liszt Academy. She made a point of being seen, of becoming a familiar, unremarkable face in the circles she was meant to inhabit. She initiated contact with several legitimate manuscript dealers and academics, discussing potential acquisitions for her Montreal-based employer and subtly dropping hints about her research into lost Liszt works. She was building a reputation, layer by layer, as a serious, knowledgeable, and discreet professional. Her communication with her handler, Gideon, was sparse and followed strict protocols. Contact was made through coded messages left in the comment cards of specific museum exhibits or via encrypted, single-use communication devices disguised as USB power banks, which were exchanged during brief, seemingly accidental encounters on public transportation. Every moment of her existence was lived under the crushing pressure of performance, every conversation a potential test, every new acquaintance a potential threat. The process of drawing Al-Hamri's attention was a delicate exercise in controlled information dissemination. The Mossad could not approach him directly. Instead, they used a multi-stage seeding process. The first leak was through a compromised art and antiquities blog in Germany, which ran a speculative piece about a rumored discovery of a Liszt manuscript in a private collection in Hungary. This was followed by a more substantial plant. A respected, albeit notoriously avaricious, Viennese information broker, who had been cultivated as an unwitting asset by the Mossad for years, was fed the information. He was told that a Canadian academic named Anna Varga had located the piece and was discreetly seeking a private buyer to avoid the complexities of a public auction and repatriation claims from the Hungarian state. The broker, smelling a massive commission, began circulating the rumor through his network of wealthy, and often shady, international collectors. The intelligence analysts in Tel Aviv monitored the information spread through the dark web and encrypted communication channels. For 6 weeks, there was silence. The tension in the Tel Aviv headquarters was palpable. Ilara, in Budapest, continued her routine, a model of patience, though the psychological strain was immense. Then, the first sign of contact came, not as a direct message, but as a subtle shift in the environment. A low-level surveillance sweep detected a new, sophisticated team monitoring Ilara's apartment, a team whose tradecraft bore the hallmarks of Al-Hamri's security detail. He was not just interested, he was actively vetting the source. The first direct contact was made through a cutout, an impeccably dressed lawyer from Zurich who approached Anna Varga in a café near the Hungarian parliament. He explained, in flawless German, that he represented a highly private collector with a deep interest in 19th-century Romantic composers. He never mentioned Al-Hamri by name, referring to his client only as the benefactor. He was professional, courteous, and his questions were razor-sharp, testing Anna's knowledge of the manuscript's provenance, its physical characteristics, and its musical content. Ilara responded with the calm authority of a seasoned academic, her answers a seamless blend of carefully rehearsed facts and improvised details. She explained that the manuscript had been part of a collection belonging to a minor Hungarian noble family whose estate was being quietly liquidated. She showed him high-resolution photographs of the manuscript, but refused to let him see the original, stating that its security was paramount. The negotiation, conducted over several meetings, was a tense game of chess. Ilara, guided by instructions from Gideon, had to appear eager to make a sale but not desperate, and she had to insist on certain conditions for the final meeting, conditions designed to funnel Al-Hamri into their chosen operational arena. She insisted that the final verification and exchange must be conducted by the principal collector himself, a common practice for items of such value and rarity. After a week of back and forth, the lawyer agreed. The meeting was set. The location, chosen by them, was the Vörösmarty Square Christmas Market, a classic counter-surveillance choice, a public space with dense crowds, multiple entry and exit points, and high ambient noise levels, making surveillance difficult. For the Mossad, it was the perfect stage. On the day of the meeting, a multi-layered surveillance and security net was cast over the square. The operation involved dozens of personnel, their roles precisely defined. A team of Katzes from the Neviat unit, specialists in physical surveillance, were disguised as tourists, street vendors, and municipal workers. They formed a discreet perimeter, their task to identify and track Al-Hamri's own security detail. A technical team operated from a rented apartment overlooking the square, monitoring encrypted communications and using facial recognition software to scan the crowds. A Kaidan unit, the Mossad's elite assassination squad, was positioned nearby, ready to act if the situation escalated or if Ilara gave the distress signal, a simple, pre-arranged gesture of adjusting her scarf with her left hand. Ilara herself was the focal point, the calm center of the storm. As she sat on the bench, her feigned sketching was a continuous stream of data to her handler. She noted a man selling roasted chestnuts who was too fit, too observant. She marked a couple arguing near the main stage whose argument seemed rehearsed, a distraction. Her senses were heightened to an almost painful degree, every sight and sound processed and analyzed for threats. The waiting was the hardest part, a period of pure psychological tension where the mind could conjure 1,000 scenarios of failure. He arrived precisely at the appointed time, moving through the crowd with an economy of motion that made him almost invisible. Tariq Al-Hamri looked nothing like the aging photographs in his file. He was dressed as a prosperous European academic, in a tailored wool overcoat and a cashmere scarf. He was unassuming, his face forgettable, a man designed to blend into any background. He did not approach her directly. Instead, he bought a cup of mulled wine and stood by a stall selling wooden crafts, observing her for a full 10 minutes. Ilara did not react. She continued to sketch, her posture relaxed, her focus seemingly on the paper before her. This was the final test of her nerve. Finally, he approached her bench and spoke, his voice quiet, his German accent academic and precise. He inquired if she was Anna Varga. The conversation that followed was brief and purely professional. It was not the tense exchange of spies, but the cautious negotiation of a collector and a dealer. He asked to see a sample of the manuscript. As per her instructions, Ilara had brought only the first page, housed in a protective mylar sleeve within an archival quality folder. This was the critical moment of the operation. He took the folder and examined the page with a small, powerful loupe he produced from his coat pocket. He scrutinized the paper's texture, the ink's feathered edges, the confident strokes of the musical notation. Ilara watched his face, her own expression a mask of professional patience. The true purpose of this exchange was not visual verification. The surface of the mylar sleeve was coated with an invisible, aerosolized chemical compound developed by the Mossad's technology division. The compound was designed to react with specific amino acids and lipids present in human skin oil, creating a unique signature. A miniature sensor, no larger than a grain of rice, was embedded in the ring Ilara wore on her right hand. As Alhamri's fingers brushed against the sleeve, the sensor registered the chemical reaction and cross-referenced it with a partial DNA profile of Alhamri that had been painstakingly assembled from a discarded cigarette but recovered by an asset in Damascus years earlier. A tiny vibration in her ring, imperceptible to anyone else, confirmed the match. In that silent, fleeting moment, the ghost had a name and a face, and he was sitting less than a meter away from her. The rest of the conversation was a formality. Alhamri expressed his satisfaction with the sample's authenticity and proposed a second meeting in 2 days' time at a private bank vault in the city to finalize the transaction and exchange the full manuscript for a briefcase of cash. He was confident, believing he was in complete control of the situation. Ilara agreed to the terms, her voice steady. The meeting concluded with a simple handshake. As his hand touched hers, she completed the second objective. A needle, so fine that it measured only 3 millimeters in diameter and was coated with a powerful sedative, extended and retracted from the face of her ring in less than a tenth of a second. The injection was painless, masked by the pressure of the handshake. The sedative was slow-acting, designed to take effect over a period of several hours, inducing a state of deep sleep that would mimic natural fatigue, ensuring he would return to his safe house without raising the alarm among his own security. He turned and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd as effortlessly as he had appeared. Ilara remained on the bench for exactly 3 minutes after he left, adding a few final, meaningless lines to her sketch to maintain her cover. Then, she calmly packed her things and began her exfiltration sequence. She walked at a steady pace towards the Dijk Ferencz metro station, melting into the river of commuters. Inside the station, she entered a restroom, emerging 90 seconds later wearing a different coat, a woolen hat pulled down over her hair, and her glasses removed. She took the M2 line 2 stops east, got off, and immediately boarded a train going back in the opposite direction, a classic maneuver to detect and shake any surveillance. A car, driven by a Sayan, a local Jewish volunteer assisting the Mossad, was waiting for her a block from the next station. Within 30 minutes, she was in a sterile apartment in a different district of the city, her Anna Varga identity dissolving as she removed the clothes, the props, the very posture of the academic she had been. The operational phase was over, her role was complete. The aftermath unfolded with clinical precision. The RFID tracer in the manuscript page that Alhamri had taken with him, activated by a signal from the technical team as he left the square, began broadcasting its location. It led the tracking team not to a hotel or a rented apartment, but to a fortified villa in the affluent Buda Hills, a property registered to a Panamanian shell corporation. Alhamri's security detail was formidable, but they were not prepared for the speed and ferocity of the assault. As the sedative took hold and Alhamri fell into a deep sleep, the Kaidan unit initiated the raid. They used shaped charges to breach the perimeter walls and windows simultaneously from multiple points, the explosive force directed inwards to minimize noise. The entire operation inside the villa lasted less than 2 minutes. Al-Hamri's 4 bodyguards were neutralized before they could mount an effective defense. Al-Hamri himself was taken from his bed, still unconscious, and transported to a waiting unmarked van. He was extracted from Hungary via a discreet airfield before the local police had even finished setting up a perimeter around the villa. The strategic value of the operation was immense, far exceeding the simple elimination of a high-value target. Tariq al-Hamri, once in a secure facility in Israel, was subjected to intense interrogation. Deprived of his network and facing the totality of the evidence against him, his psychological defenses, so formidable in the field, eventually crumbled. The intelligence he provided led to the unraveling of Hezbollah's European networks, the preemption of the Cascade attacks, and the neutralization of dozens of sleeper agents. The financial trails he revealed allowed intelligence services to seize hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, crippling the organization's operational budget for years to come. Diplomatically, the operation was a ghost, it had officially never happened. The Hungarian government was given a vague report about a gang-related incident at the villa, and the matter was quietly closed. For the Mossad, Operation Winter Requiem became a textbook example of a new kind of intelligence work, one that targeted the psychological vulnerabilities of an adversary as much as their physical security. For Ilara, the consequences were more personal and profound. She was extracted from Hungary and returned to Israel, but she did not return to the life she had known. The person she had been before the mission, the young woman, the grieving daughter, the cellist, had been completely subsumed by the legend of Anna Varga, and in the aftermath, both identities felt like hollow shells. She had achieved the revenge she had sought for so long, but the victory was ashes in her mouth. The clinical detachment that had been her greatest weapon during the operation now became her prison. She had looked into the face of the man responsible for her family's death and had felt nothing but the cold calculus of the mission. The operation had permanently altered her, severing the last connections to her past. She was no longer Ilara, the musician, nor Anna Varga, the scholar. She was simply an operative, a perfectly honed instrument of the state, her own identity the final, unacknowledged casualty of the mission. The cello in her apartment remained in its case, untouched, a silent monument to a life that had been irrevocably lost in the service of a necessary, brutal, and ultimately empty victory. What is the greater violation, to take a human life in the pursuit of security, or to meticulously forge a thing of cultural beauty, a piece of music, and turn it into a weapon? Can an operative, after living a false life with such totality, ever truly reclaim their original identity, or are they forever a composite of the ghosts they have pretended to be? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel.